His hands were shaking when he reached for mine. The sound of rain outside was the only thing breaking the silence between us. My tears had soaked through the sleeve of his shirt, and his eyes, red, exhausted, but still so gentle, looked straight into mine. "I broke our vows," I whispered, my voice trembling like glass. "I gave a piece of us away." Michael did not move. He just stared at me, his lips pressed together in quiet disbelief. I expected shouting. I expected anger. But instead, he reached out, took my hand, and said softly, "Then let us see if love can survive what it should not have to." That night, I realized what true heartbreak sounded like, not the breaking of trust, but the silence of a man who still chose to hold your hand after you had broken his heart. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to appreciate all my subscribers for your amazing support. To all my new viewers, and to those who have been watching but have not subscribed yet, I am truly grateful that you are here. I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button because it fuels this channel, and it gives me the energy to keep bringing you these emotional, real-life inspired stories every week. Now, before you get too drawn in, tell me your thoughts in the comments right after this short hook. Do you believe love can truly forgive betrayal? I want to read every single one. My name is Emily Carter, and if you saw me a year ago, you would have thought I had the kind of marriage people prayed for. I was 35, living in a quiet neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina. I worked as a marketing consultant for a mid-sized firm, and my husband, Michael, was a structural engineer, steady, calm, and everything that once made me feel safe. We had been married for 10 years. 10 years of Sunday morning pancakes, anniversary trips to the coast, and whispered I love yous before bed. But somewhere between the routines and responsibilities, I started to feel invisible. Michael was always tired, always buried under work deadlines. When he got home, he would eat, shower, and fall asleep on the couch with his laptop open. I used to sit across from him at dinner, watching him scroll through building schematics instead of looking at me. The silence between us grew thicker every night, and I began to crave something: attention, validation, warmth, anything that made me feel seen again. That is when Ryan Jacobs entered my life. Ryan was my coworker, confident, funny, and sharp in ways that caught your attention. He had an easy smile and a way of making people feel heard. It started harmlessly. We worked on the same project, often staying late at the office. He would bring me coffee, compliment my ideas, and listen when I talked about how stressful my home life felt. One evening, as the office lights dimmed, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You deserve to be happy, Emily. You give so much, but does anyone give back to you?" That question lingered in my mind longer than I wanted to admit. Soon, lunch meetings turned into evening conversations. He would text me after hours, just to check on me. I told myself it was friendship, that I was just venting. But in truth, every message from him filled a quiet space inside me that had been starving for affection. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, a Friday. The rain outside was steady, tapping against the glass walls of our office. Most people had gone home hours earlier. Ryan and I had been reviewing campaign reports, and when we finished, he offered to drive me home since my car was in the shop. The drive was quiet at first. The city lights blurred through the rain, and the air inside his car felt heavy. We talked about work, about stress, about how lonely life can feel even when you are married. Then, somewhere between the laughter and the honesty, our words stopped, and the silence said the rest. He parked outside my apartment complex, and I remember turning to say goodnight. But before the words left my mouth, his hand brushed mine, slow, deliberate, and dangerous. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered Michael's face, his sacrifices, his love. But I did not. Our eyes met, and I saw in his gaze something that both frightened and excited me, desire mixed with understanding. Then, like something uncontrollable, our lips met. It was passionate, reckless, and wrong. Every second felt like fire, the kind that burns everything you have built. I told myself to stop, but my body betrayed me. I wanted to feel wanted again. I wanted to forget the ache of being unseen. When it was over, I sat there, trembling. The weight of what I had done crashed into me like a wave. Ryan tried to speak, but I could not listen. I stepped out into the rain, not caring that I was soaked to the skin. As I walked toward my apartment, my legs felt numb. My chest ached with guilt. I had crossed the line, a line that could never be uncrossed. When I got home, the lights were off except for the soft glow from the living room. Michael was asleep on the couch, still in his work clothes, with a half-empty cup of coffee on the table. And there, draped across him, was my favorite blanket, the one he always put on me when I fell asleep watching movies. In that quiet moment, staring at him, I realized what love had always been, not the thrill, not the attention, but the quiet presence of someone who never stopped caring, even when you stopped noticing. I dropped to my knees beside the couch and began to cry silently. I buried my face in my hands, ashamed, broken, and terrified of the woman I had become. I whispered into the darkness, "God, what have I done?" Michael stirred slightly, his hand moving as if reaching for me even in his sleep. And that small gesture shattered me completely. Because that was the night I realized I had not only betrayed my husband. I had betrayed the man who would have done anything to love me right. And yet, the cruelest part of it all was knowing that this one mistake, would be the beginning of a storm I could no longer control. Guilt has a sound. It is not loud. It does not scream. It whispers, in the quietest hours of the night when you are lying beside the person you have betrayed, pretending to sleep while your heart races beneath the covers. For weeks, that was my life. The morning after the night with Ryan, I woke up before Michael and sat on the edge of the bed. My stomach felt hollow. The sight of his face, peaceful and tired, tore at me. He looked so unaware, so trusting. He reached out in his sleep, resting his hand on my leg, and whispered my name softly. I wanted to cry. I wanted to confess. But fear chained me. Instead, I went through the motions, breakfast, small talk, goodbyes. He kissed my forehead before heading to work, and I stood at the door like a ghost. At work, Ryan tried to act as if everything was normal. He smiled at me in the hallway, whispered small jokes when no one was around. But for me, everything had changed. I avoided his gaze, replied to emails instead of his texts, and stayed busy enough to drown out my thoughts. The first few days after it happened, I told myself it would fade. That if I worked harder at my marriage, if I cooked his favorite meals, if I smiled more, maybe I could erase it. But guilt has a way of seeping through even the thickest walls of denial. Michael began to notice. "Are you all right?" he asked one evening while we were having dinner. His eyes studied me, calm, concerned. "You have been distant lately." I forced a smile. "Just work stress. Nothing serious." He nodded slowly, but something in his expression told me he did not believe me. The following week, I avoided staying late at work. I stopped replying to Ryan's messages completely. He began showing up near my office door, trying to start conversations. "Emily, we need to talk," he said one afternoon. "There is nothing left to talk about," I replied quietly, not meeting his eyes. "It was a mistake." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You cannot pretend it did not happen. I care about you." That word, care, made me flinch. "Please, do not make this harder," I said. "I am married, Ryan." He gave a small, almost bitter laugh. "Married, but not happy. You said that yourself." I did not answer. I walked away before the guilt could swallow me whole again. That night, Michael came home earlier than usual. He walked into the kitchen where I was cooking dinner. I noticed something different about him, a quiet heaviness. He stood by the counter, holding his phone loosely in his hand. "I saw a message on your phone," he said quietly. "From someone named Ryan." The world seemed to stop. The sound of boiling water on the stove faded, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "What message?" I asked, though my voice betrayed me. His eyes met mine, calm but wounded. "It was not explicit," he said. But it was enough to tell me something is not right. He took a step closer. Emily, is there something you need to tell me? In that moment, everything I had been hiding came crashing down. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say it was nothing. But I could not bear the weight anymore. Tears filled my eyes as I whispered, yes. Michael's jaw tightened. His silence was unbearable. I began to cry openly, shaking. I made a mistake, I said. I did something I cannot undo. He did not speak for what felt like an eternity. Then he turned away, leaning on the counter, his head bowed. His voice, when it came, was low and controlled. You were with him. It was not a question. It was a truth spoken aloud for the first time. I nodded slowly, my voice breaking. I am so sorry, Michael. I do not know what happened. I was lonely. I was angry. He raised his hand slightly, stopping me. His breathing was uneven, but his tone remained painfully calm. Please, do not justify it. Just tell me why. Because I felt unseen, I cried. You were always gone, always tired. I wanted to feel alive again. He turned to face me then, and for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. So you found life in someone else's arms? Those words hit harder than any scream could have. He walked into the living room and sat on the couch, his hands covering his face. I wanted to go to him, to beg for forgiveness, but I could not move. The distance between us felt like miles. After a while, he spoke again, his voice breaking slightly. How long has it been? Once, I whispered. It happened once. He looked up at me, eyes red. And that is supposed to make it better? I shook my head. No. Nothing can make it better. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. Then, after what seemed like hours, he whispered, I still love you, Emily. I do not know how, but I do. I stared at him in disbelief. How can you say that? He looked at me with a sorrow that pierced through my soul. Because love does not vanish just because trust does. But I do not know if I can ever see you the same way again. I sat beside him slowly, afraid to touch him. Tears ran down both our faces. I will do anything, I said softly. Anything to fix this. He nodded once, his voice hoarse. Then we start by not pretending anymore. That night, he slept in the guest room. The sound of the door closing behind him was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. In the dark, I lay awake, clutching the pillow to my chest. Every moment replayed in my mind, the rain, the kiss, the silence afterward. Each memory felt like a blade. Over the next few days, we barely spoke. The air in our home felt heavy, filled with unspoken pain. Michael went to work early and came home late. I cooked dinner, cleaned, tried to act normal, but normal was gone. One evening, as I sat on the porch staring at the fading sunset, he joined me. He looked tired, older somehow. I made an appointment, he said quietly. For marriage counseling. I looked at him, surprised. You still want to try? He took a deep breath. I do not know if I can forgive you yet. But I want to understand. I cannot just walk away without trying. And in that moment, I realized the strength it takes to love someone even after they have broken you. I wanted to reach for his hand, but I hesitated. He noticed, and after a long pause, he reached first. His fingers touched mine briefly before pulling back. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. That night, as I lay in bed alone again, I whispered a prayer I had not said in years. Please, God. Help me become the woman who deserves the man I married. But deep down, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Because sometimes, forgiveness is not found in the words we say, it is found in the pain we are willing to face together. The hardest part about forgiveness is not being forgiven. It is learning how to live with the person you became before it came. After that night when Michael found out, something inside our home shifted. The silence no longer felt peaceful, it felt like a punishment. Every sound, every shared glance, carried a weight we both could feel but neither could name. We began attending therapy 2 weeks later. At first, I sat stiffly beside him, my hands folded in my lap, afraid to meet his eyes. The counselor, a calm woman named Dr. Linda Shaw, spoke gently, as if she were walking through the ruins of a house that had once been beautiful. Forgiveness, she said during our first session, is not the same as forgetting. It is choosing to heal, even while the wound still bleeds. Michael's eyes never left the floor. He nodded slowly, his hands clasped tightly together. I could tell he was holding everything in, the anger, the heartbreak, the confusion. When the session ended, we walked to the parking lot in silence. As he unlocked the car, I said softly, "Thank you for coming." He gave a small nod. I said I would try. Those words became the fragile thread holding us together. The following months were some of the most painful of my life. Every day felt like walking through glass, carefully, deliberately, trying not to make things worse. Michael stopped sleeping in the guest room after the second week, though he still kept his distance in bed. We barely touched. Sometimes, I would wake in the middle of the night and see him lying awake, staring at the ceiling. Once, I whispered, "Do you hate me?" He turned his head slightly, his voice rough. "No. But I hate what happened." I nodded in the darkness. That was enough to make me cry quietly into the pillow. I began journaling again, writing letters I would never send. Letters to Ryan, letters to God, and letters to the woman I used to be. I needed to understand how I had fallen so far from myself. Ryan tried to contact me once, an email that slipped through the junk folder. He wrote about missing me, about how he still thought of that night, about wanting closure. I deleted it without replying. I could not go back. I refused to go back. One evening, I told Michael about the email. I wanted no more secrets. He looked at me for a long time and then said quietly, "Thank you for telling me." It was the smallest exchange, but it mattered more than I can describe. For the first time, I saw a flicker of trust trying to rebuild itself in his eyes. By the third month, we had begun spending time together again, intentionally. Dinner dates. Long walks around the neighborhood. One Saturday morning, he surprised me with coffee and said, "Let us go to the lake like we used to." The lake had always been our place, calm water, whispering trees, and quiet trails that had once held our laughter. Walking beside him that day felt like holding hands with a memory that had not died yet. As we sat on the bench overlooking the water, Michael spoke without looking at me. "You know, I keep replaying everything. Wondering what I missed. What I could have done differently." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You did nothing wrong," I said. "I broke us, Michael. You just stopped noticing how much I was breaking." He turned to me then, his eyes filled with sadness but also something softer. "I do not want to keep living in what happened, Emily. I just do not know how to move past it." I reached for his hand, but I stopped halfway. He noticed, hesitated, then finally took my hand himself. His touch was hesitant but real. Warm. Familiar. That small act felt like sunlight after months of rain. Healing was not a straight line. There were nights he could not look at me, and mornings he woke distant. There were days I caught him staring at the wedding photo on our dresser, the one where I was laughing with my veil blowing in the wind, and I knew he was wondering if that girl was still somewhere inside me. And there were days when I doubted he would ever truly love me again. But he stayed. He stayed through the therapy sessions, through the crying, through the confessions that still hurt to hear. And I stayed too, not out of guilt, but out of the determination to become the kind of woman he deserved all along. 6 months after the affair, it happened, the moment that changed everything again. It was a quiet evening. We had both come home from work tired. The kitchen smelled like the pasta he loved, and there was soft jazz playing in the background. We ate in silence, not awkwardly, just peacefully. After dinner, I began washing the dishes, and he came up behind me. He stood there for a moment before saying softly, "You have been trying so hard." I turned to face him, water still dripping from my hands. "I owe you that." He took a slow breath. "You do not owe me anything. You chose to stay and face this. You could have walked away." Tears stung my eyes. "I do not want to walk away. I just want you to know that I am sorry, not only for what I did, but for the woman I became." He reached up, gently brushed away a tear from my cheek, and said quietly, "You are not that woman anymore." Before I could reply, he leaned forward and kissed me, softly at first, then deeply, like a memory reborn. I froze, not out of fear, but because it felt like forgiveness taking shape in his arms. When the kiss ended, he whispered against my forehead, "I have been waiting to feel this again." My body shook with emotion as I said, "Does this mean you forgive me?" He exhaled slowly. "It means I am learning how to." Weeks later, we returned to the counselor one last time. Dr. Shaw smiled gently when she saw us sitting closer than before. "I can see progress," she said. "How does it feel?" Michael looked at me and said quietly, "It feels like breathing again." I smiled faintly through tears. "It feels like grace." One evening not long after, we took a walk around the neighborhood as the sun dipped below the trees. The air was cool, filled with the sound of crickets and distant laughter from kids riding their bikes. Michael reached for my hand again, this time, without hesitation. I looked down at our hands, intertwined, and whispered, "You still hold my hand after everything I did." He looked at me gently and said, "Because that is what we promised, through the good, the bad, and the broken." I meant those vows, even when they were hardest to keep. I felt tears spill down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of redemption. For the first time since the affair, I felt peace, not because I had erased what I did, but because I had faced it. And somehow, love had survived it. That night, as we lay in bed, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for holding my hand." He smiled faintly, half asleep. "I never let go, Emily. I just needed to find my way back." I closed my eyes and held on to him, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Because sometimes, love is not about perfection. It is about endurance.